Okay, we'll just shut off the visibility for that. Now let's start making the beams. If we go Control Y for make a new solid, let's make a red one this time, just to be a bit different. And let's create another new light. So layer, new light. And call this one emitter as well. And spotlight, and let's just change the cone angle to something really low, like, yes, 7. Okay. So let's get another instance of particular on our red solid here. So particular, sweet. And we also want to grab our position and copy it onto our emitter again. And this time let's fix up our orientation. So we just have to play with the values here. Yeah, and that's back that way. Alrighty, we'll just move it up. And we want to try and find there, the first frame where it starts to fire out. Right there. And we actually want to orient it so our z-axis is pointing this way, where the beam's supposed to come out. Zoom in a little bit here. Cool. So it's pretty much the same drill. If we put that up the top, let's call this one particular, and go into the emitter, change it to lights. Now it looks like something's gone a little bit wrong here. The particles, even though they are big by default, look a bit too big. So we'll go back into our emitter, go into the position, and yeah, you can see they are forward a little bit too much. So we'll just push that back in Z space a little bit and move it over back here. Okay, back in particular. I'll change this to about 1,000 particles to start off with. We want it set to direction, of course. Emitter size we want to make really small. And let's go down to our particle and make them really small also. Check that out, we got a stream of particles. So they're moving pretty slowly. We'll just turn our footage off so we can have a look at how they look. Okay, if we go back into our emitter, hit AA, and you can see our cone angles affecting that. I'm just going to turn that all the way to 0, so we've got a straight line of particles coming out. Now we want them to shoot out a little bit faster, and to do that we obviously up the velocity. Let's make it 1,000 as well. So that's pretty fast. Let's go down and turn the life down. Actually, you need to turn the footage back on, and we want it to try and be in the middle of where our clashy thing is. So it's a little bit of trial and error here. I'm sure we'll have to come back to it, but 0.3 should be good enough here. And depending on your footage, that's going to be different, obviously. So that looks pretty cool. Now you notice our particles are following the camera movement, but they're not really following the end of the wand here. Now this is a little bit of a tricky situation since we're already in 3D space and our particles are already moving. We could do a 3D track and link our light here to that, which might work, but I have a feeling it will screw up since when we do a 2D track in here, it's not going to take into account the 3D. So let's just give that a try and see if it does in fact work. So if we click on our footage, window, and let's open up the tracker and track motion. Now it appears brighter here because if we wanted our curves to stay on, we would have had to pre-compose our footage. But since that's only really for display purposes for the moment, it shouldn't matter. Now there's not much contrast going on here, so it looks like it could be a bit of a tricky track. If we go into options, we can see it's tracking luminance. I'm going to set it to RGB because if we cycle through our red, our green, and our blue layers, there seems to be quite a bit of contrast here as opposed to looking at luminance values in our info between the two. So Alt 1, 2, and 3 is to cycle between your channels. So let's go back into options. We want to maybe adapt feature on every frame because it looks like it's going to be a pretty difficult track already, and that looks okay. So let's just try this. Track forward. It looks like it's sticking pretty well. So I'll pause it whilst it finishes. And we're back. So after about frame 90, you can see it's sort of starting to drift away, which isn't great. So if we click on our footage here, hit U to reveal all the keyframes, and let's just delete this last part. And we want to just make the search area like that. So our tracking area is a little bit bigger, it's getting more of the wand here, and our search area is a lot thinner, so it doesn't have far to look outside of where it's going. And let's try and track forward from here. That's a lot better. Oh, it's starting to drift off again here, so if we stop it. Now let's go back to where it started to lose it, which is about here, and again delete all the keyframes. There. And let's make this small again, see what happens here. And track. Yeah. Still not working too much. Like I said at the start of the tutorial, most of this is just trial and error. There's always lots of problems like this, and you just have to find the best way to solve those problems. So just trying a few different things here, trying to make it bigger again. And that seems to stick much better. It's not perfect. If we go back to 100% the size, it's close enough. We'll have a little ball of light on the end, so you won't notice a little bit of particles that isn't stuck directly to the end. Now, of course, we didn't go back to the start of where we wanted to track, so we have to track backwards from here, which we can do. Okay. Now, since there's a lot of motion here, it's just losing it. We haven't, the search region on our tracker isn't big enough, so it's probably just going to be easier to do this part frame by frame. So just click and drag, page up going frame up and page down to the next frame. And back there, there. So we're just trying to get the X in the middle of the box to the end of the wand. And let's do one more. You only really need to track where the particles are going to start to shoot out. So that looks pretty cool. Layer, new, null object, and we'll rename this to one tip. And we'll go edit target, and we want to put our position data on the one tip and apply. Okay, just dock this underneath there for the time being, and you can see our null object sticking there pretty nicely. Cool. So we need to find the frame where our light matched up to the end of the wand again, which could be around here. Just needs a little bit of tweaking. Like so. Okay, now here's what I was concerned about. If we make our null object 3D, you can see it's completely disappeared, and now that's inherited the tracking data as well. So if we were to link our emitter to our one tip, you can see it's doubling the motion, which isn't good. So maybe if we turn off 3D on our null object, and yeah, that's still what's going on. But it still looks cool, eh? So we need to figure out how we're going to get around this. So we've got a couple of options here. We can go frame by frame and track our light to the end of our wand, which sounds plausible. It's only 205 frames. It might take maybe 5 minutes. Or we could muck around with expressions and try and even out values, and that's just going to get tricky. So the easiest option is just to spend 5 minutes and do it by hand. So let's unlink our wand tip and go back to where we want the particles to start emitting, which I think I'll go from here. Move it down, move it across, whoops, and hit P for position, and let's just go frame by frame, like so. If we solo our emitter and our footage, we can get rid of the particles there, just so you can see it a little bit better. And I'll pause the recording whilst I do this. Now a good tip here is just to go every 10 frames. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll give you the general motion, and sometimes you might have to add a frame in between, but it saves going frame by frame and generally tends to be more accurate. So that only took me less than 3 or 4 minutes to do, and we've already got something that looks pretty cool. Our particles are still match moved into our footage, and our particles are coming out. Except at the start they're already sort of shooting out, but they shouldn't be. So let's fix that now. So if we go to our first frame, we'll just turn our null object off here and go into particular. Go back 1 frame, page up is a shortcut. Let's set that to 0 and make a keyframe. Now page down and change that to 1000. So you can see it's all coming out, except it's coming out at a bit of a bad angle. Our particles are shooting out along this line, which is our cone. Remember the cone angle that changes the point, and right now this is facing all the way over here somewhere. We need to rotate that around a bit. So if we click on our emitter, and this is our point of interest here, it's probably a little bit easier to hold Alt and A, which will bring up the point of interest, and just use our numbers here. Now we want to push it back in Z space and try and align the angle with the wand here. It's probably a little bit too much, and then just rotate it up. Now again, it's a little bit of trial and error. Just want the beam to be roughly about the same, and let's keyframe that too. So it comes out, and from here we want to rotate it down and maybe push it back in Z a little bit more. So now it'll be shooting into Z space here. Cool. Now since it's only particles and we're changing this value quite a bit over 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, we will get a little bit of spray like this. It's not going to join together. Sometimes fast motion, if you change a subframe to something a bit higher, it helps, but in this case it doesn't. So you can decide to keep that, or you can just start the particles a little bit later, like if we hit U to reveal all of our keyframes and just move that forward to there. Well, it needs another couple of frames. there. So that's where our particles are starting. And that's cool. So it's just looking like a straight line of particles, which, to be honest, isn't that fascinating. So what we can do is alt-click on our point of interest, and let's try a wiggle expression on here. We'll make it once a second so it's slower, and maybe make it 10, just to give it a slight wiggle in the direction it's traveling. Let's pump it up to 100. There we go. Since the particles are shooting out a lot faster, this value might have to be a bit higher just to see what it's actually doing. And again, if you pump the values up too much, we're going to get that spread there. So let's try maybe 150 and 3 times a second. Yeah, that's a little bit too fast. Maybe 1.5, 1.2. Just trial and error once again. Yeah, okay, that looks good enough. It looks like it's moving in Z space. So let's turn that down to 100 again, because we don't really want it to move backwards and forwards, more just up and down. And to enhance this, if we go back into particular, we can go down to physics, and we've got our turbulence field. So let's go affect position. You can see it's already doing stuff there. And we want our time fade in, which is here, to be maybe 0.05. Again, since the particles are shooting out so fast, the time it takes to get particles from here to here is so quick, we need to make values higher, and in this case make the time before it gets affected a lot shorter, just so we see it. Now that looks a little bit too much. I'm going to affect it maybe 55, which is cool. Let's enable motion blur. There we go. Okay, now we need to maybe push that along. At the moment it just looks like it's stuck in space, so if we have a look at our X offset, you can see what that does. Y offset does the same, and Z offset does the same. It all randomly animates. Reset those to 0, and we'll try time times 500. Again, alt-clicking on the stopwatch to enable the expression, and time times 500 is a good way of just adding constant motion. So let's give this a bit of a RAM preview. Okay, let's try and make it twice as much. Okay, that looks like it's distorting a bit too much. I'll try and make the fade-in time 0.1, just a little bit less. Maybe try messing with the evolution offset. That looks like it might do something too. So maybe if we turn this down to 700 and put another time times 400. Again, it's just trial and error. You'll eventually get something that you like the look of, but until you do, you just have to mess with all the parameters. So I'm going to turn how much it affects it down a bit. Okay, let's do another quick RAM preview. Alright, I'm liking the way that looks. Now what I normally do here is go back up to the particle settings and change the size down to about 0.5. And then I'll duplicate the particular, hit U, and hit U on the other one, and again. And we just want to link by expressions to the same one, because we want our values to be the same. We don't want each instance being different. And we can also uncheck particles per second and link that one as well. So basically whatever we do to this particular, if we change any of these values, it'll be the same up here. Okay, now if we go into this particular, I like to up the emitter size by 10, 10, 10. Go down to the particles, up the size of them, and it kind of gives it a bit of a wispier look. And it gives you more of a sense of the particles moving forward, because you can't really see it with the line. And we also want to go to opacity over life and just fade it in. And if we turn off our light, we can see what that looks like. Let's do another RAM preview. So I'm liking the way this looks, but it seems to be traveling around a bit too much. So I'm just going to go into the emitter and shut off the expression here for the light. So you can see that way it's sticking more to the center of the screen, which is what we want. And that still looks pretty cool. So the next step is to go and get a Red Bull or a coffee and duplicate this step for this guy's wand as well. What we can do is, once again, close down all these, and we want to duplicate our footage and also duplicate our camera null object, and then just group everything. Okay. And of course, right click on the footage and convert it to a guide layer. And make sure you're doing this in the pre-comp, because sometimes I do it on the footage in the main comp and render it out and it just looks blank. Anyway, so go back into our project. Let's name this beam 1. We'll duplicate it and it'll be beam 2. So let's open that up, and since we've got the footage with the guide layer, all we have to do is simply turn our light on. P for position, we want to delete the keyframes, go all the way to this side, select that, hold Shift and A, and we want to reposition our point of interest again. Now, once again, we need to get rid of the animation, and let's get rid of the keyframes here. And let's move our point of interest forward, and we need to bring it back there and down a little bit, maybe a bit more. Okay, and now we just need to go through frame by frame and track our emitter here to this guy's wand as well. So if we go to about here, move that here, let's just solo that and our footage, and put a keyframe on position, and let's just go every 10 frames once again. And we're going to need to go frame by frame for this first part, since there's a lot of motion, like so. And now just every 10 frames. Okay, so now this one's done. Looks like it needs a little bit of tweaking. The angle just doesn't seem quite right. So we'll bring that around and rotate it around this way a bit more, so it's facing more towards the camera. Alright, now if we jump back into our main comp, drop beam 2 in, like that. You can see they're both together, and if we put clashy thing on top, we have a half finish effect. Yes. Okay, now we just need to tweak values so everything lines up. So we can lock our view here and go back into beam 1, go into particular, and we need to extend the life to maybe 0.5, 0.6 even. And also for this one, since we didn't link the life, 0.5. And it also looks like we need to change the point of interest a little bit as well. So that's A whilst the light's selected, and just rotate it around a bit. Now the thing about locking the view on the composition is you don't have a live update, so you have to try and guess. Okay, that looks alright. And now we want to go into beam 2, get the position of interest. Let's just fiddle with that a little bit, try and line it up with the other one, maybe rotate it around a little bit more, go into particular and again extend the life. This one 2.5, get down, set this one to 0.5. Cool. And now all we need to do is go into the clashy thing, click on emitter and emitter 2, hit P, and just move it up a little bit more. And maybe across like that. So let's do a RAM preview of this. So as you can see, the clashy thing starts spewing out a bit too early and the particle size isn't really consistent. So that's what we need to fix. First we'll go into beam 1. Since we're in particular 2, we'll start with that. And I think we need to up the emitter size to 20. And maybe change the particle size to 3, maybe 1.5, 1.7, and back into this particular, maybe change emitter size up to 2 just to make it a little bit thicker, and change the particle size to 0.8. And let's do that for this other one. So remember on this one, on particular 2, change it to 20. Particle size 1.7, and on this one we want 2, and size 0.8. So again, if you're going to be tweaking that a lot, it's really good to go in and link everything with expressions, but since it's one simple tweak, it's okay. So let's go back into the clashy thing, into particles, and I want to turn the size of this down to maybe just 1. And we also need to time up when this starts. So if we go back to the start, we just turn off the particles, we can see them shooting, and we want it to start right about here. So if we click on the stopwatch for particles per second, we want to set this to 2000, let's maybe 2500, and go back one and set it to 0. So you can see it's starting like that. And again, since we're viewing a different composition, it's not a live update. And since we have a wiggle expression on our particles per second, we need to do something else just to stop that. So if we add a slider control to this layer, click on our particles down here and hit U to reveal all keyframes and expressions, and just change our amount from 500 to our slider control here. So it's going to start at 0, and now we can jump to the first keyframe here, put a keyframe here, and then go 1 frame forward and set that to 500. So now our wiggle expression is animated. So it starts at 0, so nothing's going to happen, but when the particles start spewing out, it instantly jumps to 500 and it'll do stuff. So if we click on particles, hit U, that brings up these keyframes now, and just slide them back a bit. We want to see where they start coming out. So maybe about there, and that gives it a bit of a jump, which is always good. So now if you hold Alt and press the left square bracket, or you can simply just click and drag, we want to start that there. So there's nothing, and then bam, the particles start pouring out. Now, to give a bit more of an impact, like these are really hitting hard, I'm going to animate the velocity itself. So if we go forward a couple of frames, just page down to go next frame a couple of times, and put a keyframe there, and then go back to the start, and we're going to make it pretty huge. That's maybe a little bit too much. Just tweaking the keyframes. That's still a little bit too much. There we go. Bam. It's always good to have a couple of frames just to give it a few more particles. Maybe we'll mess with the particles per second here as well. So maybe if we change that to 1000. Copy this keyframe to here and just put it back down to 500. So I've got a bit of an impact at the start. I kind of want a few more particles, so let's up the particles to about 7000. And if we copy this keyframe and paste it here, and then just go forward one frame and set it back to 2500 how it was before. So now that's going to go bam. And now it's started. So let's do a quick RAM preview of this. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. The velocity seems a little bit too slow on our beams here. And of course we still have that motion blur error at the end. So we maybe want to make these twice as fast. So go back into particular, go 2000. On this one too, change the velocity to 2000, and of course on these two. And we'll give it another RAM preview. So now we can see our life is a little bit too long here, so we need to go back in and tone that down. So particular life, let's try 0.4, and on here let's try 0.4, no, 0.3, and 0.3. That seems to have disappeared. Now let's try this one, 0.3, and 0.3. So one last RAM preview. Okay, and it looks like we also need to change the start time of when the clashy thing starts. So of course we'll just hit U, get all the keyframes, and move them back. And let's just start that there. So, alrighty, that looks great.